we use for the first time the form component. We will implement our login page. So first, in the login template file, we will declare our component. So we will use again the invisible instrumentation with the form HTML tag, type form, TID verified form, and some HTML attributes. Inside this form, we will use again some other components provided by the framework, very useful when we want to use a form. So we have the error component, which will display all the error messages. Then we will display a text field component and a password field component. The text field for the login and the password field for the password. Again, we will use the invisible instrumentation with the input tag. For each input, we will associate it to a label with the label component, type label, and this component just take one mandatory parameter, t4, which represents the TID of the associated component. So the first label is associated to the text field, so its TID is login. So we put to the label component t4 equal login. Again, for the password field label, the password field TID is password, so t4 equal password. Finally, we had a submit button with the submit component, input type equals submit, and you can specify a client ID parameter. Then the last thing is, in this exercise we would like to disable this form after 3 submissions which are not succeed. So we use a tDisabled parameter, and max atoms exceeded will refer to one of our attributes available in the login page. So that's all. In our login page, we will annotate our user manager with the @return annotation, because we used to annotate the heavy object with this annotation, so it will not be reinitialized after each request. So it will be initialized for just one instance of a page. We will annotate the logged user with the @session_state annotation. So this variable will be available in all the pages of our application. Logging password will refer to the inputs declared in the TML. So if we look to the text field and password field, we declare a t-value attribute, and login and password will refer to the variables declared in the Java class. So here, login, password. The count variables, the count attribute will store the number of submission. We will persist it, because if we do not do that, this variable will be lost after each request. And we will annotate the form attribute. So this form will refer to the form used in the TML file. So we will use the @component annotation, and we put the TID of the desired form, so verified form. So with this variable, we'll be able to use some very interesting methods. For example, if we want to store some error messages. Then we just have to implement the activate event. In this event, we will initialize our manager just by using the get instance methods of the user manager. And finally, after 3 submission, so we will test it with the get max atoms exceeded, which will return a Boolean value. So if the user has tried more than 3 submissions, the form will be disabled. So if this method return true, we will display a specific error message. For each variable we can annotate them with the addValidate annotation, so we can put some validators for each attribute. So for example, our login and password will be required, so if the user does not fill the inputs, the form will not be succeed. And finally, I have to implement the validate form. In this method, we will check if the data entered by the user are good. So we will check if the user already exists of our application. If it doesn't exist, we will return to the user an error message. So we will annotate the verified user with the validate form annotation. We will annotate the verified user with the onEvent annotation, and the value will be a validate form event. In this method, we just check if the user with the login and password entered by the user exists in our application. So we will use our user manager. We will just get a user with the same login. If it does not exist, we will increase the count variable and record an error message. Then if the user exists, we will check if he has the same password. Again, if it does not have the same, we will increase the count value and return an error message. And if everything is okay, we will log the user by changing the logged user attributes, which is annotated with the add_session_state annotation, and return the user to the main page. So if we test our application, I return to the login page. If I check with the good user, I logged and everything is okay. If I log with the wrong user, we can check if the disable mechanism works. Okay, so I refresh the user. So if I try a wrong user, so the first time I have an error message, second time I have the same error message, the third time I have another message, which indicates that the form is disabled because we have to try a submission 3 times. The other thing I want to show you is how to write a unit test for a form component. So if I look to the test logging Java that I write, we just have to take the same class implemented in the previous exercise. So the setup method is just the same. But in our test methods, we will be able to pass some data to our form and submit it, and just try if the return generated HTML is what we expect. So for doing that, we just have to get the form element, so with the get alignment by ID, and we just have to create a map attribute, so map string string field value, which will contain all the data we want to put in our form. So we have 2 inputs, so we have login, password. In the first test, I put some wrong data, so tapestry and pass, so we expect that the form will return an error. So in the second test, we expect to be redirecting to the main page. So in this main.tml, we can check if we have our bonjour string available in the main TML, bonjour. So that's okay. We can check our test. If it's green, our test succeed, and if it's red, it does not, and if it is green.